We open now this session, the morning session. My name is Leo Corri. I am Dean of Humanities here at Tel Aviv University. I am not a researcher of migration, but I am, I think like every citizen in the 21st century, I realize very strongly that migration is one of the most important phenomena of our time. And perhaps migration has always been an important phenomena, process, but it seems that now we are in an era where this is a very, very central thing, and I guess I don't have to explain that to you, but just to tell you that even if I am not a researcher, I follow very closely some of the important phenomena going on now, and I must mention one that is not included in the program. It's perhaps the most dramatic one going on now in the world, that is the Venezuelan migration to Latin America, and as I come from Venezuela, this is one that I follow very closely. Too bad that I don't have anyone to explain me more here in this meeting.
We have a conference in June devoted to Latin America only.
Okay,
so,
okay, very good. Okay, good. So let me introduce you the speaker, Gur Alroey. It's always a pleasure to introduce colleagues, but in this case it's a very special pleasure because Gur is my colleague, my fellow dean at Haifa, the University of Haifa. So I think that it's also one of the reasons why I was chosen to introduce him, and it's a pleasure to do so. Gur is a historian of Jewish history in modern times and the director of the Ruderman Program for American Jewish Studies at the University of Haifa. He has a PhD from the Hebrew University from 2001 in Jerusalem, and his research interests include Jewish migration in the late 19th century and early 20th century to Palestine and to the US, early Zionism and the territorial ideology, first decade of the British Mandate. And he has published 6 books and many articles in the leading journals of these topics. On these topics, I just mentioned 2 of the latest, among the latest. An uncompromising land, Jewish immigration, an unpromising land, but it could be also, I think, you should think of that for your next title. An unpromising land, Jewish immigration to Palestine in the early 20th century, Stanford University Press 2014, and Zionism without Zion, the Jewish territorialism organization and the Zionist movement. The talk today will be about between history of immigration and history of immigrants, new trends in Jewish migration research. Good, please.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Ranan, for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be here and to open this session this morning. Now, my lecture today is not historical, but methodological. I do not intend to speak about Jewish migration and its reasons or about the absorption process in the countries of destination. What I will try to do is to present a methodological approach to immigration research in general and Jewish immigration in particular. And I would like to start with a quote from Philip Taylor's book, The Distance Magnet, and I quote, "It's never enough to think of migration continent by continent, or nation by nation. Immigrants were not European or even German and Swedes. They were dwellers in a Norwegian valley or in the Black Forest district of Wittenberg. They were Slovaks from the northern hills of the Kingdom of Hungary, Bulgarians from Macedonia, or Ashkenazi Jews from western provinces of Tsarist Russia. No scholar, of course, will ever be able to comprehend all these local details." End of quote. Migration is an individual experience, not a collective one. Anyone trying to truly understand it has to penetrate the statistics and quantitative research. This is not an easy mission for historians. And, as Philip Taylor noted in the quote that opens this lecture, it is almost impossible to understand all the reasons that motivated millions of people to uproot themselves from the native lands, cross continents and seas, and move to the new unfamiliar lands on the other side of the Atlantic Oceans. Yet, despite the methodological challenge facing the immigration researcher, these subjective dramas multiply 100,000-fold are worthy of studies and examination. Irving Howe, in his monumental work, The World of Our Fathers, on Jewish migration to the United States, argue that researchers do not have enough information to understand why, given a particular economic and political reality, there was those who chose to migrate and those who chose to stay. And I quote, "The statements one finds in the memoir literature are persuasive through their repetition. We came because we were hungry. We came because we were persecuted. We came because life in Russia or Poland had grown insufferable. These are the answers one gets over and over again, and there is not the slightest reasons to doubt them. But what they do not, perhaps cannot, explain is why some Jews acted on these urgent motives and others did not." End quote. To cope with this methodological challenge, the migration researchers must use specific primary sources that will enable him to examine the migration process from below and from the viewpoint of the migrant. Sources of this type can include records of those leaving and entering port of exit and entry, ship manifests, letters written by immigrants, diaries, oral testimonies, or application to aid organizations. These sources are usually rich in information, and through them one can bring the immigrants to life, give him form, and pull him out from the statistics and quantitative research. My lecture today seeks to examine the Jewish immigrants' experience at the beginning of the 20th century through primary sources I found in archives both in Israel and the United States, and divided into two parts. The first part deals with the characteristics of the Jewish migration and the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, and I will do it very briefly because I believe that we know the data. And the second part, which is much more important, in the light of the quantitative findings of the first part, I intend to demonstrate how the primary sources which I find in archives enliven the statistics and add an important layer to the quantitative research. And I would like to start with the characteristics of the Jewish migration. Some 2.7 million Jews migrated within 50 years. I would say from 1875 to 1924, until the United States closed its gates, to 6 destination countries. The overwhelming majority went to the United States. And the rest dispersed among 4 continents: Asia, Palestine, Africa, South Africa, South America, primarily to Argentina, and Australia. Although Jewish migration was an inseparable part of general migration at the time, it also had 5 distinctive characteristics. First, the ratio of Jewish migration to the number of Jews in the world was significantly higher than that of any other ethnic group that migrated from Europe to the New World. Of the 60 million people who migrated from 1830 to 1939, some 4 million were Jews, which is 6% of the total migrants population, while Jews were only 1.5% of the world population. 2, Jewish migration was family-oriented. The percentage of women and children was especially high. Some 44% of Jewish migrants were women, and it was very high compared to other ethnic groups, and a quarter were children under 14. Jewish migrants generally took his family because it was considered a permanent move made with no plan to return to the country of origin. After World War I, the ratio of women was even higher, to more than 50%. The occupational composition of the Jewish migrants was different that of the general migrant population. Over 2/3 of those gainfully employed worked in skilled trades. 4, because Jewish migration was family-oriented, the number of dependents was especially high. And 5, because Jewish migration was intended to be permanent, the rate of return to the country of origin was low. From 1908 to 1924, the rate of immigrants to the United States who emigrated back was about 33%, while among Jews it was only 5%. From United States to Europe, because in Palestine it was completely different situation. More than 75% left Palestine in the early 20th century, which is a very, very high rate of immigrants. Okay. The above quantitative data is important for understanding the reason of Jewish migration, its scope, and the composition of the migrant populations. But this is not enough. If we want the immigrants to take shape and come alive, we must try to get behind the enormous number of 2.7 million Jewish migrants. Some questions still should be asked. How did the Jewish immigrants make the decision to migrate? Why in the same economic situation some lived and some stayed? How much time passed from the moment they made the decision to migrate until they implemented that decision? Can we trace the journey experience from the immigrant's point of view? And now in the next minutes I would like to present you archival sources that can help us to understand immigration from below. And the documentation saved in the archives can be divided into 4 types. First, aggregated data. For example, statistic. The mouse is...
Now it's okay.
Okay. Aggregated data, for example, statistic of American immigration authorities or Jewish aid organization. You can see this is the Ellis Island records. The left column is race or people. We have the ethnic groups. I think it's the years 1911 and 1912, and we have total numbers, how many males, how many women, and we can do the demographic composition by gender, we can do it by age and occupation, but we have no names in that case.
בחיצים ולא
כן, אבל אני צריך את ה... כדי להגיע.
ועכשיו לא בא.
תחזיר את זה עם ה...
תעלה את זה עם החצי.
כן. אוקיי. Literature guide and other printed materials distributed to immigrants that provided them with relevant information, and I will talk about the importance of information in the decision in the making decision to migrate. These brochures are written in the same FAQ, frequently asked questions style, that we know from the internet, and includes substantial information about the migration process. And I would like to give you some example. For example, of course, all of them in Yiddish, and that brochure was published in 1906 or 1905. Allgemeine Idees für die Wille von in fremde Länder, general information for those who want to travel to other land, and the immigrants can purchase the booklet and get the information in need to migrate. Of course, there is a booklet on America, which was the major country of destination. And again, allgemeine ideas, the general information about America. There is also a booklet on ideas wegen Eretz Yisrael, about Palestine in the early 20th century. Map, we can see the map of the United States and copy-paste of the Russia, again to give the Jewish immigrant a proportion, what's happened, or where is America, and its size, and table of ships and port of destination, of port of origin. We can see in the first row we have again the ports in Libau, Hamburg, Bremen, Rotterdam, Antwerp, London, Southampton, Liverpool, Genoa, and the port of destination, Quebec, St. John, Halifax, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, San Francisco, Rio de Janeiro, Montevideo, Buenos Aires, Melbourne, and so on. So the immigrants can get the information when the ship leave the port, how much it costs, and it's helping to plan his journey. The third archival sources is records of inquiries by individual, and this is different from the aggregate data, to their local bureaus requesting financial assistance for immigration. And I will talk about what we can do with that kind of inquiries. The letters by immigrants sent to Jewish aid organization with specific questions regarding the destination country and their chances of succeeding there. And this is maybe the most important primary source, that there are hundreds and even thousands of letters that I found in different archives of immigrants that I'm not sure if they emigrated, but they consider immigration, and they send letters to the Information Bureau and ask questions if it's right to do the move or not. And C is addresses of home and Jewish businesses in the Lower East Side. And it's very interesting source I would like to present our list of addresses of Jewish immigrants on the Lower East Side. These addresses of homes and businesses enable us to map the Jewish neighborhood and the social ties among the Jewish immigrants and between them and their neighbors. Now, in my lecture, the list were business and addresses of Jewish criminals in New York. The database I constructed allows me to map Jewish crime in the city at different levels of resolution and to examine Jewish crime as part of the fabric of Jewish immigrants' population life in the city. This is also a relatively new method used today in the digital humanities sphere, a new exciting field that enables the researcher to process his raw data into a set of advanced and sophisticated digital displays and interfaces such as the map presented here. And what we can see, I found the addresses of the criminals in archives. Now, when I built the database of the addresses, I found the coordinates, of course, in Google. The streets are the same street in New York, and altogether I put it in the GIS. It's a geographical information system, and I can get the map. So I have more than 700 addresses of criminals. Now, I'm not talking about the gangster, not Meir Lansky or Baxi Seagal, but the, I would say the ordinary thieves. And this is a wonderful map that we can see when I code the addresses. Again, we can see this is Manhattan and the Lower East Side. The red spots are gambling. The the green spot is prostitution. We can see, of course, in Harlem, that was, of course, a Jewish area in the early 20th century. And I can do it also by streets, not only by in the city. For example, the 1997 Orchard Street. Now, I took the Orchard Street because here we have the Tenement Museum in Manhattan, which is a very popular museum today. And there is 5 stories of 5 different families. And of course, one of them is a Jewish family, and they tell the story, but nobody mentioned that in the corner there were 2 bordels and gambling. And again, this is an example how we can play between macro and micro. And now, in the next few minutes, I would like to demonstrate how we can use these sources for understanding migration from below. Let's take a look on the record of the applicants who applied to Jewish Information Bureau in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. The document summarized the application to one of the Information Bureau during the year 1912. It has 9 columns: first and last name, age, occupation, city of departure, port of departure, shipping company, destination city, relative in the destination country, and the amount of money the applicant received from the Bureau. This summary of all the immigrants' application enabled the construction of database of names that enable one to study not just the demographic composition of the Jewish migration, but to examine it at the much higher, sharper, more accurate resolution. We no longer need to rely on general statements regarding the high migration rate of women and children, or about the migrant occupation. We can try to determine the age of the women who emigrated, the size of the family, the age of the children. We know that they came to, a quarter came to the United States under the age of 14, but it's a big difference if they come when they were 2 years old or 13 years old. What kinds of trade the immigrants practiced, from which cities and towns they came from, the port of departure, the destination, and the relatives in the new land. These records allow the researcher to examine Jewish migration from both macro and micro perspective. In other words, building a database that includes all the applicants' names does more than just enable a statistical analysis of the inquiries to the Information Bureau. It also allows us to pull out and examine one representative example of family who migrated to one of the destination countries. Moreover, we can cross-reference this data from the countries of origin with relevant databases compiled in the destination countries. These records enable one to follow the journey of the migrant from the city of origin until his destination city. We can determine how long his journey took, what ship he traveled on and from, which port of departure, who was waiting for him at the destination port, and answer many other questions, other such questions. Now let's take the case of Leon Kaplan, the child Leon Kaplan, number 33 here. From the Information Bureau record, we can see that he was 9 years old, lived in Odessa, which is on the Black Sea, and sailed from port at Libau on the Baltic Sea to his father in New York, receiving 13 rubles. 5 minutes? Okay. From just from the listing, we understand that little Leon crossed the Pale of Settlement from south to north by train, a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. All this can be found from the ICA, Jewish Colonization Association Information Bureau record that was preserved in the Central Archive of for the history of the Jewish people. But this is merely a clue to understanding his entire journey. Leon Kaplan immigrated to New York, which means he recorded in the Ellis Island database, and the two sources of information can be cross-checked. Now, from the Ellis Island passenger record, it's emerged that Leon Kaplan arrived in New York on April 16, 1912, on the ship Lithuania, from the Ellis Island database on line 16. This is the list, and Leon Kaplan is here. We would be able to get the name of other passengers on the ship with whom Leon shared his journey, and that his mother paid for his passage. And from the Hayas record, we know that his father's name was Brodsky Kaplan, and that he lived in Harlem, neighborhood of Manhattan, a heavily Jewish area at the time, at 113 East, 123. So we have three different sources about Leon: Ika, Ellis Island, and Elias, and all together we can tell the story of Leon Kaplan. While Leon Kaplan is an individual case, but because he was pulled from a large names database, he can be of assistance. Although most immigrant children did not immigrate alone, the application to the Information Bureau, the entry, the sailing condition, and the arrival at Ellis Island were integral to the migration experience and were common to children and adults alike. Because there is extensive literature on every stage of the journey, we can place Leon's story in much broader historic context that goes beyond his individual case. Okay, I skip, and I would like to focus for just really 2 minutes in the letters. Jews who were considering immigration wrote to the Information Bureau official or other Jewish aid organization asking for information that would help them make a decision. These letters are important primary source because they were written in real time and from the perspective of the immigrants. One can find in them description of family members and their occupation and resources they had at their disposal, and question about the destination country and the chances of their integrated in the new world. The following letter, of course written in Yiddish, of Moshe Tselnik of the town of Dubosary, and I would like to quote from the letter. Having nowhere else to turn for satisfactory answer, I have the honor to write to you, and I believe that you will not refuse me and will answer my question below. Now I have decided to leave for America as a result of terribly critical situation in our area. I want to know whether there will be something for me to do in America connected my profession, and therefore would need to know the following. Moshe Tzenik was a liquor distiller, and that's the question he asked. Do people in America drink a lot of liquors, or do they mainly drink unsweetened spirits like gin or whiskey and liquor distilled from wheat, corn, rye, and such? Are there many distilleries in the United States of America, and is it possible to quickly obtain a position in such distillery? 3, if you happen to know, how much does the government get from each level of alcohol percentage per 100 liters of liquor? What can we learn from the letters that were sent to the Jewish aid organization? What insight can we reach using such letter, a Tzenik letter? I have not enough time to elaborate the question, but would like to address a few topics. First, the key of immigration may have been availability of information. Information was important because it reduced uncertainty. The information might be first or second hand based upon some recognizable authority, but it has a critical influence on the actual decision to migrate. 2, the deliberation and request for information show that the decision-making process was a rational one. This was not a spontaneous decision triggered by despair, but reasoned one in which the prospective immigrants tried to figure out what would be best for them. And 3, we can learn about migration consideration and the why and the way decisions were made, not only from what the letters say, but also from what the letters do not say. The letters contain very few references to persecution and attacks on the Jews. There is almost no mention of the surrounding population and the relationship with the letter writers. Economic hardships and a desire to improve one's standard of living were the major concern in the decision-making process. And I would like to conclude my lecture with the poem of the communist Turkish poet Nazim Hikmet, The Great Humanity. The great humanity is the deck passenger on the ship, third class on the train, on foot on the causeway, the great humanity. The great humanity goes to work at 8, marries at 20, dies at 40, the great humanity. There is enough bread for all, except the great humanity. It is the same for rice, for sugar, for clothes, for books. There is enough for all, except the great humanity. The great humanity has no shade on his soil, no lamp on his road, no glass on his window, but the great humanity has hope. You can't live without hope. I believe after years of research, we can definitely conclude that hope was the one thing each and every immigrant had. As scholars of migration, if we succeed to understand the hope of the immigrants, we will understand better the immigration process. Thank you.
Thank you, Gur, for this very interesting talk, and we will have time for 2 or 3 questions. But if you allow me, I will add a point. I said I'm not an expert on the immigration, but to make this approach really work correctly, you need also to make the reading automatic. And this is not science fiction. We're doing it here already at the Wiener collection. We are close to it. You cannot read all the letters, you cannot read all the records, but you can, with the help of the people here at the computer science school, you can read the letters automatically eventually, looking for keywords like places, names, etc. When you reach that point, this will really will be able to give you much more information. Of course, you can start in this way with the analyzing a relatively small database, which is what you can do by hand. A big database, you can only do it automatically. So, you know, for the near future, not for the far future. Yes, please.
I wonder if you can say a few words about IPOMs, the historical IPOMs. the US Census data, the historical data, where we know the names of the people who immigrated and all other information recorded in the census data, because they're open after 70 years with names, etc. So I wonder what kind of information is there that can help your project.
Wonderful talk, and I did immigration advocacy work for 10 years in the 80s. And the three things that you said at the end were exactly the situation of Salvadoran immigrants. Information is key, rational, and the economic hardship. And it was not political persecution of the Civil War, it was economic hardship. So then, if that is the general, if that could be seen as a general pattern of why most people immigrate today from Central America to the United States, or in the early 20th century from Odessa to New York, what do we really want to learn beyond that? I mean, you gave the big picture, but what are you really trying to understand? What are the key questions that you want to understand about Jewish migration, which is distinct from this generalization, which is very smart and helpful to think about?
So just one more question by Jeff, and then please, Gur, you can answer.
So I get they're both methodological questions. The first is, do your addresses change over time? In other words, when you put in a 1900 Orchard Street address in current Google, do you have to correct for anything? So that's question one. And question two is there any way to generate, I think it's related to your question, information about non-Jews who are living in the same buildings or whatever that allows you to kind of build a street beyond just Jews or just Jewish gangsters or whatever?
Okay, so in my research, I focus not on the absorption process in the countries of destination, not in the life in the Lower East Side in Manhattan, not in Buenos Aires, not in other cities of destination. What I'm trying to understand is the transition. How the Jewish immigrants made a decision to migrate. And this is the questions. Why in the same political situation some stay and some left? I'm very interested in understanding the bureaucracy of immigration, how to get a passport, when they cross the border, the sailing condition, the situation in the port of origin, the relationship between the population in the ports and the immigrants. I focus in emigration, in E, and not in I. And that's what I try to understand in that data base. Now, we know about the immigrants who actually did it. They crossed the ocean and came to the country of destination. But what's about the hundreds of thousands who didn't succeed to cross the ocean and stay in Hamburg or Liverpool, Bremen, Antwerp, and many other? They were actually also they didn't make the shift from emigrants to immigrants. They remain immigrants, and I try to look at these people. So, to your question, Jeff, yes, but not in the Lower East Side between Jews and non-Jews, but between Jews in Hamburg or in the Haus van der Halle in Wedel and the local Jewish population in Hamburg and the non-Jewish. Again, the relationship between the smugglers who taken from one point in the border to another. And that's what I try to understand the transition. Now, regarding the census, I have to say, that I didn't use them yet. And I believe that it's very interesting to compare of what for example, in the Jewish Colonization Association Bureau, what when they ask the question, what did they answer? And again, what's happened to them when they arrived to the United States. For example, Leon Kaplan, he arrived in the States when he was 18 years old. I can find him in the census, not only in the highest records. What happened to Leon after 10 years or 20 years in the States? But it's a source that I have to learn how to use it, again, from the macro and the micro perspective. About the
Difference between Jews and
yes, of course. I think that I agree. We sometimes, as researchers of immigration, we believe that our case is unique. But when we build the database, I agree. Yes, there is a common denominator between all the immigrants. Ethnic groups that migrated from one place to another. And I believe that if we can, if we build a database, we can find the common between the other ethnic groups. And I'm glad to hear that some of my conclusion meets yours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this very interesting talk.